Suddenly, I heard a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door.
1994's The Crow was plagued with production issues from the start, from natural disasters destroying sets, crew members getting injured, and the eventual death of the film's main actor. The film was based off of a 1989 graphic novel of the same name, created by James O'Barr. In the story, guitarist Eric Draven and his fiancée Shelley are brutally attacked by a gang after their car breaks down. Before they are both killed, Eric is shot and paralyzed, only being able to watch as Shelley is assaulted by the thugs. Eric is soon resurrected by a mystical crow, who gives him the strength to find and kill each gang member one by one, as an act of revenge for his fallen fiancée. The crow itself acts as sort of a guardian and a means of surveillance for Eric. O'Barr states that he wrote the novel as a coping mechanism, following the real death of his own fiancée, after she was tragically struck by a drunk driver. Film studio Miramax would approach O'Barr 2 years after the comic's release about creating a film adaptation of his work. Originally, O'Barr thought the casting of Eric Draven should go to someone who was a well-known A-list actor, such as Johnny Depp or River Phoenix. At one point, the studio kicked around the idea of making The Crow a musical, and have Michael Jackson play the part of Eric, according to O'Barr.
One of the producers, in a meeting, one of the producers said, and this is no joke, he literally said this, I know, we can do this as a musical, we can get Michael Jackson to star in it, and we can get Julian Temple to direct it. And I thought it was a joke. I started laughing. But he was completely serious, and that's how it is in Hollywood. It's like.
Could you imagine what The Crow would have been like if Jackson had played the part? In the end, the studio decided to cast their first choice for the role, Brandon Lee, son of martial arts actor Bruce Lee. Lee was already a huge fan of the graphic novel. He, alongside new director Alex Proyas, were able to bring the film back to its original source material before filming began.
And then when Alex Proyas and Brandon came on board, they were both huge fans of the comic and insisted that it be taken back to what it was in the beginning. And Brandon especially was really enamored with the books, a big fan of the books.
The problems that would plague The Crow's production began almost immediately, with one of the crew members nearly getting killed on the first day of shooting. According to an eyewitness, the crew member was using a cherry picker to set up some of the studio lights, when he fell into a ditch and was electrocuted by a nearby pole. Despite several burns to his internal organs, the crew member narrowly avoided death, thanks to the bystanders on set, who got him out in the nick of time. This would just be one of many unfortunate accidents that would label The Crow as a, quote, cursed film. Another electrocution would soon follow after, when a carpenter was working on a metal grinder that touched a series of power lines. Again, the carpenter survived, but not without severe burns to his hands and chest. More injuries would continue to befall the cast and crew members, from a stuntman falling through one of the roofs on set and breaking several ribs, to one of the crew members having a screwdriver accidentally shoved through his hand. This is somewhat eerie since there's a scene like this in the movie. There's also an account of someone driving a car straight through the set. Some say this was an accident, while others claim it was a crew member who had recently been fired and wanted to take his anger out on production. Despite these occurrences between the people working on the film, nature would also throw in a few curveballs of its own. On the third night of shooting, actor John Polito, who had played Mr. Gideon in the movie, stated that one of the trucks on set sporadically burst into flames. To this day, there's still no source of how or why this happened. Not long after that, the backlot sets of North Carolina were destroyed by a hurricane and a blizzard soon after, in 1993. This is often referred to as the Storm of the Century. This series of tragic events didn't go unnoticed by the public, with Entertainment Weekly referring to it as the Curse of the Crow. The article covers most of the incidences listed here, along with a few comments from the crew members. One of these comments, made from production coordinator Jennifer Roth, was an eerie response to the backlash against filming. She stated, "I don't think this is exceptional. We have a lot of stunts and effects, and I've been on productions where people have died.
Tragedy, it seems, runs in the family. Bruce Lee was a movie star who died young and became a legend. Now his son Brandon is gone as well, fatally wounded while starring in a movie. 5 hours of surgery at this hospital could not save the life of 28-year-old Brandon Lee. He was fatally injured on the set of his latest movie, The Crow.
On March 31st, 1993, Brandon Lee walked on set to shoot the infamous scene where Eric was to be murdered by the character Funboy, played by Michael Massey. The scene was to go as followed. Eric would have walked into his apartment with a bag full of groceries, only to see his beloved Shelley being assaulted by the thugs. Funboy would have shot him with the .44 caliber Magnum revolver, and Eric was supposed to fall forward. When the scene was filmed, Lee fell backwards instead of forward, but they continued with the scene nonetheless. When Proyas yelled cut, the crew members noticed that Lee was laying unconscious on the floor, bleeding. The revolver that Massey had been given to shoot Lee was only supposed to be filled with dummy rounds. It was later found that while the gunpowder had been cleaned out of the dummy rounds, the gun primer had been left in. The revolver had not been inspected beforehand, as the weapons specialist was conveniently offset during the time of filming. With the full force of the primer, the dummy round was launched and pierced its way through Lee's abdomen and into his spine. He was quickly rushed to the hospital, where he underwent 6 hours of surgery in an attempt to save his life. Despite the best efforts, however, Brandon Lee succumbed to his injuries and sadly passed away later that evening.
Actor Brandon Lee, 28, died at 1:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Wednesday, at New Hanover Regional Medical Center. He was brought to the medical center's emergency department with a penetrating wound to the abdomen shortly after 1 a.m. Wednesday.
Lee's death would serve as a devastating loss to both the crew and to those closest to him. Michael Massey, who had shot the round that struck Lee, was so traumatized by the incident that he went into seclusion for a year after The Crow finished production. Up until his death in 2016 from stomach cancer, it's reported that he never watched the movie, as he was too wrapped with guilt over what had happened. I think it's safe to assume that Lee wouldn't have wanted Massey to blame himself for the incident, and I pray that they both found peace over it. Before his untimely death, Lee had finished most of his filming for the movie, with just the beginning left to complete. His mother, along with his fiancée Eliza, gave their blessing to Proyas to finish The Crow, as they believe it's what Lee would have wanted. With the film already behind schedule, and the sudden loss of their main star, the crew had to scramble with what they had in order to create a complete product. This meant having to both add and take away certain elements that were in the original script. One of these elements was a character from the graphic novel called the Skull Cowboy. The Skull Cowboy was another spirit that served as a second guide for Eric, alongside the Crow in the living world. The character was portrayed by actor Michael Berryman, who donned a full body and head cast made out of acrylics for the part. The result gives us a pretty cool character design from what we can see in these pictures. I dare anyone to try and do a cosplay of this. Who am I kidding? There's someone out there who can pull this off no problem. The cowboy's purpose in the film would have been to guide Eric on his newfound immortality, as well as berate him every time he strays away from his mission, as seen here in these rough edits.
Get out of my way.
You risked everything. I took that risk and lost.
That's your story.
And you'll go as a mortal alone.
I'm already alone.
Then choose. Choose and be damned.
Before Lee's passing, he was scheduled to film essential scenes related to the cowboy character. Since these scenes could no longer be filmed, nor could the crew work around it in any way, the Skull Cowboy was removed entirely from the film. Some say it was for the best that the character was cut for the sake of the film's tone, while others mourned the loss of Berryman's performance. Thankfully, Berryman's contributions to the film haven't gone unnoticed. Something else that had to be reworked was Eric's resurrection scene. Originally, the crew had Lee's body double, Chad Stahelski, who would later become the director of John Wick, wear a mask that was molded into Lee's face. As you can imagine, the cast and crew decided to scrap the idea as it was just way too unsettling. So instead, they opt to have Stahelski's face in shadow while portraying Eric, with some of these scenes having Lee's face digitally inserted over his. Honestly, these effects are so well made that you probably couldn't tell the difference unless it was pointed out to you. Some of the scenes between Eric and Shelley, played by musician actress Sophia Shinnis, were reworked into flashbacks, which included the opening to the film. Rather than begin with the assault on Eric and Shelley, the film instead begins with an overhead shot of the city, with fires being spread on Devil's Night. The city in the opening shot was actually constructed on a miniature set, complete with CGI flames. The shot then zooms in the window after the assault takes place, with the police investigation beginning the narrative of the film. After months of a difficult and tragic production, The Crow was finally released on May 13, 1994, in memory of both Brandon Lee and his fiancée, Eliza Hutton. It was both a box office and critical success, with Lee's haunting performance receiving most of the praise. Contrary to popular myth, Brandon Lee's death was not included in the final film. While the incident had been filmed, the footage was used in the investigation and then was promptly destroyed shortly after. Over the years, The Crow has been cited as an inspirational comic book adaptation, with films like The Dark Knight following in its shadow. Watching the movie as a whole, it's amazing to see how well all the cut corners were hidden. With what little they had to work with last minute, in my opinion, it turned out a damn good product. To this day, The Crow is still favorably received, with a dedicated cult following due in part to its soundtrack, gothic style, and of course, Brandon Lee's performance. In what was supposed to be a breakthrough film for a young actor, The Crow serves as both a time capsule and a tribute of a star that continues to shine on in the hearts and minds of those who will always remember.
Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really.